My Schizophrenic Life, The True Story of Tracy Poe. Part 12, My Breakdown. Chapter 51, Neighbor Trouble. Losing my job at Quiet Flex was for the better, because my father invited me on a Carnival Cruise Line cruise scheduled for a few weeks later, and I got to go since I was unemployed. I had been on one before for 3 days, but this one was for 7 days. I had money saved up to cover my rent and needs for a few months. I left enough dry food for my cat, and left a key with Randall and Susan so they could check on my cat Brindle, and left some canned food that they could give her. On the cruise, I was paranoid and heard voices, but nobody knew because I hid that fact. I mostly stayed in the cabin and watched the television. I hated the shore excursions. We went to Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, and Cozumel. In Jamaica, we were packed into a bus and beat to death on a bumpy road until we got to Dun River Falls. They had everybody hold hands and walk up the falls, and I bailed out of the line before we even got halfway up the falls. At Grand Cayman, we went to Stingray City and swam with the stingrays. I could not wait to get off the crowded boat and got in the water with the stingrays and tried to stay away from everyone. In Cozumel, I went to the pier which had shops, but quickly went back to the cabin and watched the television and did not go on any tours. Being on the cruise was hard because I heard voices and was paranoid the whole time. But none of my family knew anything about it. When I got back, there was one can of cat food opened on the counter, but not put in a dish. I had gotten some cigarettes and bourbon for Randall and Susan, so I went over there to give it to them. When I was drunk, I accidentally talked about the little girl again in front of them. In my deluded mind, she was real. I went over to Randall and Susan's place one night when their kids were gone, and some guy was over, and they had been doing cocaine. He was rolling around on their waterbed play, wrestling with Randall, and broke Randall's necklace that had been his father's. Susan had passed out on the bed. I did not think you could pass out while on cocaine, so I wonder if she was faking. The guy laid out a line of cocaine for me and said, "Either you are cool or we will kill you." I did the cocaine and immediately hallucinated and saw the little girl in the room with us. Randall pulled the passed-out Susan across his lap and pulled her sweatpants down and started rubbing her. He said to me, "Don't you want some?" I said, "I can't, because there is a little girl." In truth, I did not want to do that no matter what the circumstance was, but that is what I said, and I left. I felt terrible at my apartment. I was seeing the Holocaust people and skeletons in rags and the little girl, and soon my bones ached from the cocaine which I have never liked. I was looking for a job, and I had gotten an appointment to be evaluated at a temporary service. I left my apartment to get some beer, and when I came back, I saw Susan sitting on the steps looking at me. She was often out on the steps watching me after the night of their cocaine bender. I told her about the appointment I had with the temporary service for testing. She said, "Oh, really? Which one?" And I told her the name of the service. The temporary agency was down the belt way to the north side of town. I drove there and went in and filled out some initial paperwork. Then I was in the front part of the office taking a test on Excel at a computer terminal in an area where there were other computer terminals and some other people testing. A lady came out and was standing there watching me and the other people taking the tests. Someone asked her, "What kinds of employment do we put down in our history?" And I heard her say, "Whatever experience you have, like making videos of children, that is an employment history." I could swear I heard her say that, and it was not a schizophrenic voice, but my problem is, I am never sure. I interviewed with a different lady, and despite testing well, I was not hired for any jobs by this company. When I returned to my apartment, I saw Susan sitting on the steps outside her apartment again watching me. Chapter 52, Escape. I was looking at job listings in Houston on my computer, and I saw one for a graphic artist drawing in scale in Corel Draw. It was at Bell's Awnings and Signs, so I called and set up an interview for the next day. That night, I did some drawings to scale on Corel Draw version 8 of a cart like I would make at Mitsubishi Caterpillar Forklift America. I had worked with Corel Draw version 8 for over a year by that time. I went to the interview and the owner, boss, seemed to be impressed with me, and I showed him the drawings I had done. He asked, "Was this done on Corel Draw?" And I said, "Yes." He asked me how much I needed to make, and, in an effort to get the job with no genuine experience, I said $10 an hour. The last guy they had in this job made double that. He was impressed enough to give me a test. He had drawn on a paper a man standing beside a sign. They had Coral Draw version 7, which was not a problem, but I was having problems with the part of the sign where it was curved in an irregular shape. There was a guy there that was a freelance salesman who also drew his own plans. He saw me struggling and asked what was wrong. I said, I am having trouble drawing this shape. He then showed me the technique that you use in Corel Draw to draw any odd shape. It took him less than a minute to explain to me. I was able to draw the shape after that. 2 hours after I started, I had drawn the drawing the owner, boss, had wanted me to. He said it does not take 2 hours to draw these drawings, but because I only wanted $10 an hour, he said he would hire me on contract. That meant he would pay me, but I would not be an employee with benefits. I went to work at Bell's Awnings and Signs. There was a guy named Fred there who cut all the vinyl and plexiglass on the computer numeric control machines. I would be collaborating closely with him and 3 salesmen. I would draw the proposed sign to scale on a single page that showed a drawing of the building and what the sign would look like. This rendering was for the salesman to show the customer. Then Fred would pull the vector shapes off this drawing and import them into the vinyl cutting machines and the computer numeric controlled router that cut plexiglass. Then he could cut out the sign pieces that I had designed. The first week was rough as I had no experience, but I caught on quickly, and by the second week I was up to speed and drawing what they needed. The first week I was hearing the danger warning voices, but by the second week they had subsided as I got more comfortable. It took me only 40 hours to learn how to draw to their specifications. I was there a month, and every time I came home, I saw Susan watching me from the steps outside their apartment. Then on Friday, September 1st in the year 2000, I came home, and Randall and Susan were on their steps. I told them about a guy named Serge, that I had done a drawing for that day. Randall's eyes were darting right and left as he looked at me. There were a bunch of people in their apartment I could see from where I was on the sidewalk. There were a bunch of people around that usually were never there that day. After I had said what I said to Randall and Susan, Randall kissed Susan and I heard him say, "We killed him, baby." But my problem is that even though that did not sound like a voice in my head, I could not be sure because of my schizophrenia. I went to my apartment and got some money and then drove to the store to get beer. When I was getting in my car, some older kids on bicycles pedaled up and looked at my truck, then turned around and left. There were people outside standing around on cell phones I had never seen before. I started getting paranoid and hearing the warning danger voices. I drove to the store and got a case of beer and drove back. And there were even more people around, and I was not feeling well after driving my truck to the store. I went inside my apartment and looked in the mirror, and there were spots on my neck. The warning danger voices were telling me I had been poisoned. I knew how you poison a vehicle from my time with Butch. You pour the poison on the air conditioner vent that is accessible through the grill on the base of the hood by the windshield. I had run the air conditioner when I went to the store that day. The warning danger voices told me I had to stop drinking beer and get out of there. I packed up some clothes in a trunk and gave the cat a bunch of dry food and water and went out and put the trunk on my skateboard and rolled it down the sidewalk to my truck. I had to pass Randall and he was laughing at me and asked, "Where are you going?" I did not answer and got in my truck and left. I did not run the air conditioner this time and rolled down the windows. The whole sky became dark with intense clouds in an ominous line on the horizon. Once the dark and menacing clouds were overhead, it started to rain hard. It was the weekend of Labor Day and I did not have to be back at work until Tuesday. I tried to drive to my father's house in Sugar Land, but I had only been there once, and in my panic, I could not find it. I then tried to go to my brother's house, but I was hearing voices, manic, and could not find that either. I drove to Paul's house but saw people outside of it and got paranoid and did not stop. I eventually got a hotel room with my credit card at a hotel near Hobby Airport. I had not drunk any beer that Friday, and I was not drinking beer Saturday when I checked out of the hotel near Hobby Airport. I decided it would be a danger to my family if I tried to go to their house, so I drove to Galveston and got a hotel room there. I was still sober all day Saturday as I sat in the hotel room in Galveston. Then I started feeling bad and my throat felt rough. Then the warning danger voices said, "They are here also." I could hear something coming from the door to the next room over. I could hear a tap, tap, tap sound, and then a squirting sound and poison were coming from under the door. I left and threw my card key on the front desk. My room was the first room you came to outside the front counter. People were in the front of the hotel, and they were coughing as I went by. I went to get in my truck and people were in the parking lot saying something about their child's diapers. But I was not sure if what I heard was real as I was hearing other voices. I drove back to Sugarland and thought that cars were following me. I was delusional, manic, and heard voices the whole ride to Sugarland. I got to my brother's house, which I found this time, and his wife, my sister-in-law, Charlotte, was home. I tried to explain that people were after me, and she asked if I had been drinking, and I said no, I had not drunk since Thursday night, and this was Saturday night. I showed her that I had a strange rash of small, red, painful bumps in between my fingers, just like I did when Butch poisoned me. Charlotte said that it was from stress, and that her friend Vicky had the same thing because of problems with her husband. My father was out of town that night but would be back Sunday. She let me sleep on the couch in her living room. The next day, Charlotte said she was going to get an oil change and asked if I wanted to get an oil change also. So, we went to the car center where they had big glass windows where you could watch them work on your car. It was crowded and we had to wait a while. A family came in and they all stood by the front door to the establishment, and their young daughter walked back and forth in front of me several times. The warning danger voices told me to not look at her, and I stared straight ahead but watched with my peripheral vision. As they were leaving, the mother said, "He is thinking dirty thoughts." When we got back to Charlotte's house, her daughter and her friend were over. My niece was 13 at the time. Some lady came over. Charlotte said it was because she wanted to sell her house that had partially burnt down, but while she was there, she said in front of me, "And your niece is so young and they are so pretty at that age." When she was leaving, I said, "It was nice to meet you," as I am always polite, and she shot back in a menacing tone and said, "Was it?" My brother and father both returned home Sunday. We went with them to Barnes & Noble for something that did not involve me. People were talking about me there also. I heard some man say, "It's a conspiracy," when he was looking in my direction. The warning danger voices told me that that was about me. My brother was the first one in the family to figure out I had schizophrenia. He said that I had that disease where I thought people were out to get me. The thing was, I did have schizophrenia, but people were out to get me in addition to this. We went to the movies that day and saw Space Cowboys for some reason. There were people in the audience talking about me, and a family sat next to us and tried to have their young daughter sit next to me, but my nephew Jeffrey was there and she sat next to him. In the movie, the character played by Donald Sutherland had an inappropriate relationship with his daughter, and every time he was on screen, people would cough around me. This happened a lot. People would cough around me. I could never be sure if it was real or not because I am schizophrenic, but I was pretty sure I could tell the difference between the voices in my head and what people were saying around me. The next day was Monday, and there was a van with 2 guys in it parked in front of the house next to my father's house. The warning danger voices said that they were there because of me also. I told my father that people were treating me like I would hurt children and saying things about me, but he did not believe me. I moved into my father's house on September 4th in the year 2000. Chapter 53, Second Poisoning. I remember staring at the vent in his spare room trying to sleep. On Saturday, I thought they were tracking my credit cards, but by Monday, I thought they had put a GPS tracker on my truck. I returned to work on Tuesday, and the phone started ringing. Lots of people were calling in. The receptionist said, after the phone rang, that the call she got was a nice call because nobody said anything. About an hour later, the phone stopped ringing when Nancy, the office manager, started telling people, "We will handle it." I heard one of the salesmen on the phone say, "Let him suffer, we love it." During that week while I was working on drawings, Nancy, the office manager, would stand within earshot of me and talk about making videos of children. People who were at first nice to me were kicking rocks at me as I left after work. Then, after the next weekend, I started to get poisoned at work again. I worked in an area by myself in the back by the printer. I started to feel like I was going to cough. I could not see anything, but there were vapors irritating my throat when I breathed. I just acted like nothing was going on and kept on working. People started coming up behind me and clearing their throats. Still, I ignored it all. When I was poisoned by Butch, I told everybody, and it did not do any good. This time, I told only my father, and he did not believe me. He thought I just had schizophrenic delusions and tried to reinforce how important it was to keep that job. After the irritating vapors did not scare me off, they began to try other things. One time I was working and began to pass out like they were hitting me with ether vapors. When I went home to my father's, I told him that they were spraying me with vapors that made me feel like I was going to pass out. I was crying while I told him. He took me to a psychiatrist and told me that if I took care of paying for the psychiatrist, he would pay for everything else. At the psychiatrist, I told her what was going on at work, and as I was explaining it all, I was crying. She asked me if people were getting in my head, and I said, no. But I told her about the voices. This was the first time I told anyone about hearing voices since I talked to Buchanan in 1984 in the Marine Corps. I did not tell her about the Holocaust people and skeletons in rags or the little girl, but I admitted I was hearing voices for the first time in 16 years. She asked me if I would take medication, and I said yes, and she wrote me a prescription that we got filled. One Thursday at work, I bought a soda out of the soda machine. One of the salesmen, an old man, came and was having me draw for him, and he was overly friendly. After he left my workstation, I saw him in the salesman's office, and he looked worried and distraught. This was totally different from the way he was acting just a few minutes prior. I poured out the soda and did not drink any more of it. Then I heard the receptionist say to someone, "He poured it out." I am convinced that the old salesman had poisoned my soda. I went back to work, and that Friday they poisoned my car. When I got in, it was full of irritants. I saw Fred walking outside and smiling at me as I was driving off, and realized that he was gone from the office every time the vapors affected me. I figured he was the one doing it. I figured that they ran a hose down the wall to behind my workstation and would distribute the chemicals into my area that way, but I have no way to know exactly how. But I am guessing they put the chemicals in the hose and sprayed it with a can of air. I woke up Monday and dreaded going back to work, but I went because of my father. That morning, they hit me with something bad that made me feel like I was going to die. I figured they would poison my car again, so I told the receptionist I was not feeling well and asked if it would be okay to leave. She said yes. Then Nancy asked what was going on, and as I was walking out, the receptionist said, "He is leaving." After I quit my job at the sign company, the van that was parked in front of the neighbor's house next to my father's house left, and I never saw it again.